Hey, it's Luke at Out of Darts. We are checking out the Rival Challenger. We're gonna show you how to open this guy up, take it apart, upgrade it to a LiPo battery, and improve the performance as well as the usability since you'll no longer have AA batteries. Before we get going, this mod does require a LiPo. Please make sure you read up on LiPos. This is not an exhaustive list. This is just an extra card we put on the package. You got to make sure you read the manuals and the safety directions included both with the charger and with your battery. First, we're going to go over the tools you need. You're going to want eye protection. You are going to want a hot glue gun, or you could probably get away with epoxy putty or something similar. You'll need a soldering iron, wire strips of some sort, though you can get away with an X-Acto knife, a #1 screwdriver, pliers. Optionally, flush cutters are very useful, though if you're going to use a Dremel, you can skip these. You'll probably want a Dremel, though you could get away with flush cutters if you just want to do a little bit of extra hand tool work. You'll want a pair of wire snips and an X-Acto knife. Really any type is fine, but I'm testing out this #17 blade because it's really great for cleaning up the battery compartment. Next, we'll cover the supplies. You're gonna want some 16 gauge wire. You could get away with 18, but I'll recommend 16 because there's plenty of room in the blaster. A single 21 amp switch. You'll need an XT60 male connector like this one, or an XT30 depending on what you're doing. I'm gonna go to XT60, but you may see me in testing take the battery that's an XT30 and actually adapt it. If you ever have a blaster where you don't really want to rewire or you want the option to switch to both, sometimes an adapter can solve that problem. You'll also want some heat shrink. For sure, you'll want some small stuff, and some large stuff is kind of nice for covering your XT60 connector. And you'll want some lead-free solder. I like this 1.5mm diameter that we carry on the shop. As far as the battery goes, this is very much an exploratory video, so we'll make this video nice and clean cut and it'll be really fast. We're not gonna waste your time. But as far as which battery to choose, there are a lot of options. We believe this 450 milliamp battery, this tattoo pack, will fit without any modification. But if you're going to print your own extended battery door, the options open up a lot. And I think this 1100 pack is gonna be a great one. This is a 3S 1100 30C. I think this is gonna be a really good fit because it's got lots of room for a LiPo alarm above. But I suspect in today's build, since we have not printed a battery door yet, we're gonna go ahead and go with this one. Without further ado, let's get to it. So first we're gonna take the blaster apart. And to do that, the first thing you wanna do is remove your battery tray. If you've got batteries in them, you can say goodbye to them and transfer them to some other toy that your children like. Next, I'm gonna take a pliers and I'm gonna rip all of these terminals out because we are going to gut this entire area. I find these are easier to rip out while they're still in here. It's worth noting you really should have eye protection. You can stop when you hit this point. These last two terminals are connected to wires on the inside. Next, we're gonna remove all of the screws. This is #1 screwdriver. However, I'm going to cheat and do this the fast way. All of the screws are the same size, so you don't need to worry about mixing them up. Now, I have had the misfortune of having a screw that was basically stripped out the second I touched it. With that stripped screw, it's really important that you go slow when you're removing these. Try not to be too aggressive. I don't think I stripped this one. I think it was partially stripped or over-tightened as it went in. And really the best thing you can do is use a newer, nicer screwdriver of the correct size, usually a #1. Apply a lot of pressure. This screwdriver was perfect for this because it's a precision screwdriver. I can put pressure here while turning with the other. And then worst case scenario, if you get completely stuck, you basically need to use a screw extractor or a de-threader. Or if you've got your shell open, you can literally cut it off with a Dremel through the gap here. There's a few options there, but it can be pretty challenging if you do screw up. Fortunately, we got it. Once you've got all your screws removed, you can go ahead and take the shell off. Take your snips, and you're gonna have some wires here in the middle that are gonna be stopping you from separating the shells. At this point, you're definitely gonna wanna go ahead and make sure you get all the screws out, so if any of the screws didn't fall out, you know, give them a little tap out with your screwdriver and add them to your collection. We'll start with this side of the shell. You can remove or cut out just about everything here. Just so you know what you are removing, you are going to bypass this. This is a door that needs to be closed to activate the switch for the blaster to work. We don't want that. Or you could choose to keep it, but I'm not going to. Again, keep your eye protection on during this time. You can use snips if it's easier to cut at some of these solder joints. You can pull this switch off here. I will say they really went overboard on the wire pathing. I've never seen Hasbro do quite so much as far as the actual wire path. Pretty interesting. Now we're gonna do the big one. We're gonna work on this battery tray. So essentially what we're trying to do is we're gonna get rid of every piece of webbing that's in here as much as possible. There are two ways to do this. One is to use a Dremel and you just keep carving away. If you have a pair of snips and a pair of flush cutters, you can very easily cut through these. Just, you kind of cut the ends is usually the best. And then you can keep grabbing with pliers. You know, that came out so easy. I think I'm gonna do the whole thing that way. And this happens a lot because like the Dremel is great, but the Dremel also makes a huge mess. So cleaning up this tray is really about leverage. If you can kind of pull the parts, the fins this way, they come out really easy. There are multiple points where they're connected to the end. You'll wanna get in with flush cutters at the end to snip them. Then you'll wanna pull out these two terminals on the back by flipping the blaster over, or you can poke them through. I'm probably gonna poke them through. Just get them out of there. There they are. And at that point, we have it cleaned up enough. Now, your level of OCD is your choice. You can choose to make this absolutely perfect in here, or you could literally stop now. The key is you don't want any sharp bits sticking out that could possibly put pressure on the LiPo battery itself. Honestly, I don't think this took me any longer with flush cutters and snips than it would have with a Dremel, which is pretty cool. I remember when I did my very first mod, I was told I basically had to get a Dremel, and I was kind of mad because I was like, I just want to mod this blaster. So I went out and bought the Dremel and then found out I could basically do everything with snips and tools pretty easily. There are times when, okay, so don't do that. I just broke a blade. Not that uncommon to break blades when you abuse them like I do, but it's why you always have these on. So we're gonna now take a drill bit or a Dremel and we're gonna enlarge this hole large enough to get 2 pieces of 16 gauge wire through. I'm gonna carefully, again, I have eye protection on, but I'm gonna carefully just enlarge this with this. It's probably a drill bit is your best bet. Check again and make sure that you can get 2 pieces through, but that looks good. So this is the other side of the handle. The switch is going to butt up against this, and this is going to be in your way. Now, you might have to do a little trial and error, but essentially you're gonna wanna cut out the majority of this Lego piece. Come on, it's a Lego piece, right? And that should do it there. I think that's far enough, but you can always test when you close up. So we're doing a section out of order, so ignore the wiring that's already done here, but we're going to drill out a wire path that I decided would be a better option. We're gonna drill a hole through this webbing, this webbing, this webbing, and this webbing. Most importantly, the first and the last, and then we're gonna feed our wire through it when we actually wire it. This part is probably totally, not completely necessary, but sometimes it's nice to have those easy wire paths. I'm just using a regular drill. You could also use a Dremel, you could drill it by hand, or you could possibly melt it too. But essentially, I'm just gonna put a hole through here. And that'll do. You don't want to completely destroy all that webbing there because it does help the rigidity of the blaster. If you remove all of that, you are weakening the actual strength of the parts there. And that should do it. You really, as long as you have the first one and the last one, you can run it into the first, over the others, and then through. So I gave some deliberation over the switches here, and I may still design a switch plate because I know it makes it easy for a lot of you to just like drop it in, perfect spot. But one of the things we gotta consider here is this trigger lock. So right now you cannot activate the firing trigger unless the rev trigger is pressed. Now normally in some blasters I'd say let's get rid of that, but I really think you should keep it here. So it's optional, you can take this whole part out and eliminate that motion, and you can put the switch in here and you'll get a nice clicky switch, more reactive, nice feeling rev trigger. But if you do that and you hand your blaster off to somebody who is not familiar with the rev trigger, they will be able to feed a ball into flywheels, then rev, and completely burn out your motors. I do think the way we're gonna do it here is what I would recommend. What I'm gonna point out to you is this one little screw boss here, which is our little friend. It's almost like someone put him there for us. The placement of this switch is going to be just precisely tucked right up against this edge here. That way, this can still go up, and then it will activate the switch. So the action is going to look like that. And the depth is going to be flush against this screw boss here. So your switch will touch against there. In this video, we're just going to fill this with a high temp hot glue. You can use any type of hot glue. Just know that if you use low temp, it could melt in a hot summer day. But as a reminder, your batteries shouldn't be sitting in a hot car anyway. So keep that in mind. So I'm gonna go ahead now and we're gonna fill that area with glue and we're gonna get a spot for this to fit in. And when you're working with glue, it's usually easiest just to kind of work in layers, like get a little bit going, let it settle. There are techniques here for using metal to quickly cool this, but I'm just gonna kind of let it air dry and then I'll kind of keep building up layers. I am remembering why I like my switch plates so much and why we sell so many of them. Hot glue takes forever. Epoxy putty, you gotta put on gloves and get your hands really dirty and wait 30 minutes for it to cure. Anyway, we're there. We've essentially built this up, so now that this whole plate is flat, I want to get this switch in right here, like this. I don't want it to necessarily be touching this lip, so what I'm gonna do is just put a light layer, and if you went too high, great thing about hot glue is you can actually remelt it again. And then I will drop this in place right there. You want plenty of room right here because there's a little shell boss that has to sit there and a screw boss there. Now that I've got the switch actually set, the most important place to add more reinforcement is the back. So the reason for that is you're gonna apply force this direction and there's nothing but the glue holding that switch in place. So especially around this top, I'm gonna go ahead and build that up a little bit down here. Make sure you don't get too much on your actual terminals because that could cause you problems. If you did do the hot glue method, you wanna be careful here that down by the bottom here, you haven't made a part that'll collide with this. You can kind of tell if you move the switch around, but test it when you're done. I'm just cutting off a little bit of extra, which is the nice thing about hot glue. It's pretty forgiving and you can mold it pretty easily. Great pro tip, if you ever need to get hot glue out, spray rubbing alcohol in there. It takes it out like a dream. Okay. Now we're gonna go ahead and take out our flywheel cage. While I was here, I kind of noticed this is a really interesting assembly here. They have a totally separate piece for the kind of conversion where the magazine goes in and the ball flows. Kind of nice. I think they wanted that to be a little more precision and it's a little bit different. For now, I'm just rotating this piece out of the way so I can get this assembly out. It looks like I can remove this whole thing without even touching this guy. Before I rip this PCB off of here, I do want to mention that you actually could leave this all intact and simply rewire to these positive and negative terminals. I believe there are some diodes in here that are for RF noise. Those are actually beneficial. However, the ones that I'm concerned about that are probably not going to work for us are these. These are PTCs, which is essentially a temperature fuse. So if too much current comes through, it will shut down the blaster. I suspect in upgraded version with the 3S LiPo and the current that can provide, we're going to be higher and these may clamp down. But since I haven't tested, in this video, I'm going to go ahead and remove this whole thing. If we have more advice on this later, we'll post it in the description below. Eyeglasses on. We are going to have to clip these two terminals. This terminal bridges to the motor can, and again, that's for RF noise as far as I understand. I'm going to tin my soldering iron. And anytime you're doing a board removal, it's easier to put on a little bit of solder. Again, I'm always using lead-free. Make sure you're soldering in a ventilated area. We're in a nice big warehouse here with a ceiling vent. And there we are. So looking at this orientation here, we want positive on this side, and I'm just gonna mark them because it makes it easier to remember later. I'll put a little plus, but keep it red, that's obvious, so positive that side, negative that side. So go ahead and strip your red wire. After stripping your red wire is gonna go like this. Leave a little bit of extra slack, but I like to mark a spot over here so I can strip that. You can do this with an X-Acto knife if you needed, but since I've got the proper thing, I'm gonna go ahead and use that. So it's gonna be just like that with the excess wire going off to the right on screen here. Since I've got a nice terminal to work with, I'm gonna go ahead and I like to split open the wire with an X-Acto knife and actually place it right down on here. It adds a nice positive lock holding that in place. Kind of do the same over here. And then we're gonna come back with our soldering iron and go ahead and solder that up. I wouldn't say those are perfect solder joints, but they're plenty good. Then we'll repeat for the negative wire, which I'm going to, of course, do in black. This method allows me to omit using a helping hands on this tutorial. And I do like helping hands, but it's one less thing to set up. Now we're gonna go ahead and drop that cage back in. You kind of have to work it up around this part right here, the little mag insert portion. Up top here, you do want to make sure that these wires right here go up to the top and not underneath anything here, just so they don't get stuck. Now we'll go ahead and return all 4 of these screws for the flywheel cage. Next, we're going to take these wires and we're going to start threading them through a path to get them back to the back of the blaster. Now I think we're going to start by clipping this little fin just a little bit here. And that'll allow me to actually use that wire channel because that's what it was originally. Now the black can go just to the back of the blaster. It's going to go up into the battery tray right about here. If you recall, we put our hole right there, so ultimately that's essentially done. So now I'm going to take my hand and I'm just going to hold this in place, and I'm essentially just going to use hot glue to trap some of these wires. Now this can be a little bit messy. It's not totally necessary. You could use gaffer's tape. You could also use even masking tape might hold, duct tape. But I find that if you do this, they're very unlikely to come back later. But you do have to sit here and wait a minute for them to hold. You could put a little dab in here. It's, again, not completely necessary. And note that hot glue doesn't actually stick that well to silicone-coated wire, but it will stick to everything around it. So when you're looking at this joint here, you're actually kind of bridging those two more than you're holding to the wire itself. And I'm going to do one more here just because I can, and I'm here. Easier to do it now than have it move later. I'm actually going to take this clip out and leave it out for this section. And notice where I've got this wire going through. It's between those two paths. We're going to go right over the top here, and then we're going to feed through our first hole. This is where pliers can come in handy. And then we can go through our second and or third holes, depending on what you have. I really have 2 workable holes and then one kind of destroyed hole, but it doesn't really matter. And hopefully the holes I've made are big enough, but we're going to pull this reasonably tight. And that's going to be soldered to this terminal right here. So I'll go ahead and essentially clip that. About like that'll do. And we'll go ahead and strip that. With this one, if I'm able, I will shove it into the hole slightly. I might not have left myself really enough slack to do with that, but sometimes having a little physical anchor can make it easier to solder without helping hands. Yeah, and I was able to get part of that in there, so that will hold it plenty fast and solid while I solder. I'll take the other piece of the wire, we'll go ahead and strip that again. And these are the common and normally open tabs in case you're curious, but I like to just bend this little piece down that I've shoved through, holds it in place while I can solder. And once that's cooled, we're going to send this wire all the way back through that same wire hole. If for some reason you can't get your wire through, you can always enlarge the hole with a screwdriver or perhaps with an X-Acto blade if you really get desperate. I probably made my holes a little bit small, but they'll work. And now both of these will go on up out to our battery door. You're gonna wanna make sure that you put this shell piece here back together, and then you're gonna wanna grab this goofy guy. A few of these screw bosses kind of have to be forced in and through these plastic bits to actually hold it together, like that. You also wanna place this rail back up on the top. I believe it goes right there. Now that we've got it here, it's a really good idea to test your polarity. The good thing is, if you got it wrong at this point, as long as you wired it something close to 2 straight lines, all you'd have to do is flip your XT60. I'm going to use this AA pack that came from, I believe, the Mark III. And we'll run this through. This is low current, so it's a little safer in case you want to test your actual wiring. So I plugged that in, and I'm gonna rev the trigger. And I can indeed see that those are going the right direction. This is also a good opportunity to look for rubbing or any other issues that could be happening. Now we're gonna go ahead and close up our shell. So the first thing we're gonna do is basically take these 2 wires, shove them through that hole that we created earlier. I'm making a big mess of the wire there, but that's okay. I've got extra slack I gotta snip off anyway. And then we're going to put this blaster back together. So So you kind of want to work everything in kind of together simultaneously. It can be a little bit of a challenge at times getting everything to line up, all the screw bosses, all of the screws themselves. And then it's good to examine the shell all the way around. Make sure that as you're closing it up, you still can get everything completely closed. There's a little crook here, and that's basically where your wires need to feed. They need to go down underneath this blue screw boss there. And that way there's tons of room for them to have some strain relief, and the whole shell should close up. But if you're having any issues with this back corner closing up, that's definitely it. And once you feel like the shell is good on all sides, you can go ahead and return all 22 screws back together. Now that I've got all of those parts back together, I'm going to get this side piece back. Pinch these guys down here. It's just a snap fit. Now we're going to go ahead and attach our XT60 connector. You could use an XT30 because the pack I'm using is an XT30, of course, but I'm going to do XT60 and then have an adapter ready. I'm actually using a type here that it's an XT60U, so it has a nice little cap that buttons up and protects the back terminals. But this would also be the time to put on heat shrink if you're using a standard XT60 connector. I like to solder while it's connected to the female side. Go ahead, we're going to set that right in there. Eyeglasses back on. The most important part when soldering these is to make sure that you don't have wires touching the two terminals together. For that, we can go ahead and put our cap on. All right, and at that point, we are ready to plug in our battery. Don't forget to use a LiPo alarm. For this demo, I'm not going to, but I'll go ahead and plug that in. You can see just how much space you've got there. I do think this 1100 will be a nice fit. Really, we have a variety of packs that will fit this space if you do a battery door, but if you want to do it without, this 450 is great. For those that are concerned about the 450 pack, this is a 45C pack. These motors don't pull anywhere near as much as people think they do. They're actually only pulling about what our lowest end motors do, so this pack can easily power these motors. And from there, we can go ahead and screw this in. We will also offer thumb screw kits for this guy, so those will be up as well. And at that point, here we go, the fun part. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this tutorial has been helpful. If you have any questions, please let us know down in the comments and we'll try to respond to as many as possible. If you get stuck on a build and you're a customer of ours, feel free to email us with any questions. We're always here to help. Until next time, I'm out of darts.